Welcome back, explorers, to Whoosh Tales, the home of the greatest adventure stories for kids anywhere on the internet, bringing you a brand new English story for children every single week. This is episode 9, and if you have been with us since episode 1, you have come a very long way with Finn Walker. You have flown to the edge of the world with him. You have traveled through deep space. You have descended into the hidden city under the ocean and walked into the living forest and climbed inside the breathing mountain and met the brother who shared his name. And now, in this episode of the most exciting kids' adventure story series on YouTube, the path that brought him to all of those places is about to point him somewhere completely new. Somewhere the world itself seems to have been hiding from him. Somewhere south. The morning after Caleb's compass first appeared, the two brothers sat at the kitchen table with both compasses on the wood between them. The original compass, the larger ancient one Finn had recovered from the chamber beneath the cottage, pointed exactly where it had been pointing since the moment Finn carried it out of that underground chamber. It pointed at Caleb. Specifically at Caleb. Not at Caleb's general location, but at the precise center of Caleb's chest, the way it had once pointed precisely at Finn before Caleb had walked out of the mountain. Now that the work of finding Caleb was complete, the original compass had simply stopped seeking and had settled into the calm satisfaction of an instrument whose mission has been finished. It would point at Caleb forever, Finn understood. That was its job done. The new compass, Caleb's, was a different thing entirely. Smaller, the size of an apricot, its casing the warm gold white of held sunlight. Its needle was a steady beam of soft inner light that pointed unwavering toward the south. Not roughly south, precisely south, with the kind of certainty that suggested the compass knew not only the direction but the exact endpoint and was simply patient about getting there. Caleb had been studying it since it appeared, turning it gently in his palms in different rooms and at different times of day to see if anything would change the bearing. Nothing had. South. Always south. Nora came in with her usual 3 flasks of tea, set them down on the table with the calm efficiency of someone who had clearly been waiting for this conversation, looked at both compasses and then at her brothers, and said, "When are we leaving?" Finn looked at her. Nora looked back. "We are absolutely going," she said. "Both compasses are pointing somewhere. One of them is brand new. You have a brother who has had a power for less than a week and has not yet had any practical experience using it. We are obviously going together, and we are obviously going soon. Pack today. Leave tomorrow." Finn opened his mouth to say something, and then realized he had nothing to add. Nora was correct, as Nora frequently was, and the matter was effectively settled. They left at dawn the next morning. The cold, pink highland sky was just beginning to soften into gold as Ember lifted off from behind the cottage with all 3 of them on her back. Finn at the front holding both compasses, Caleb behind him with his arms loosely around his brother's waist, and Nora behind Caleb gripping the great crimson spines with the practiced ease of someone who had now flown often enough that flight no longer required her full, anxious attention. They climbed steadily into the morning sky, and Ember banked gently south and the highland landscape they had all known their entire lives. The dark pine forests, the silver locks, the small gray villages, the stone walls running like long careful seams across the green hillsides, began to slide past beneath them and fall away behind. Caleb was quiet for the first hour of the flight. He was sitting in the position behind Finn that gave him the clearest possible view of everything passing beneath them. And Finn understood that his brother was experiencing landscape from the air for the first time in his life. Not just landscape in general, which Caleb had only experienced from the ground since the morning he had stepped out of the mountain, but the full extraordinary moving panorama of the world unfolding beneath flying wings. He needed to be allowed to take it in. Finn left him to his silence and watched the south unfold ahead of them through the cold, clean air. The British Isles slipped beneath them in the changing colors of an early summer morning. The green of the Highland Hills gave way to the lower, softer green of the borders, then the patchwork of fields and small towns of the English Midlands, then the brown gold-green checkerboard of the southern English countryside. The smell of the air changed as they flew south. The cold mineral clarity of the Highland morning gradually warmed and softened, gaining a sweeter undertone, the smell of wheat and ripening grass, and the faint, distant scent of orchards. By mid-morning, Ember was flying through air that tasted of warmth on the tongue, slightly humid, carrying the particular living richness of southern English summer that Finn had never traveled this far to encounter properly before. Caleb finally spoke when they crossed the south coast and the dark blue of the English Channel opened beneath them, the white cliffs of Dover catching the strengthening sunlight in a long bright line below. "I had read about this," he said softly. He was not speaking to Finn or Nora exactly. He was speaking to the act of seeing. "There was a book in my room with a photograph of these cliffs in it. The book said they were called White Cliffs." He paused. The book did not say how white they actually were. He paused again. "Or how much they would feel like a country saying goodbye to you as you left it." Finn thought about this and felt his chest tighten slightly with something that was not quite sadness, but was related to it. The particular emotion of watching someone you love experience for the first time something you have always taken for granted, and understanding for that moment exactly how much beauty has been in your ordinary life without your having properly noticed it. They crossed the channel, and northern France slid beneath them in long, wide green-gold fields divided by neat hedgerows and the slow, careful curves of rivers. The villages here were red-roofed and clustered around small church spires, and Finn could smell, even from their altitude, the bakery smoke of mid-morning rising up to meet them. Caleb pointed silently at things as they passed. A river, a particularly large vineyard, a herd of pale cream-colored cows, a small chateau with a pointed slate roof, a field full of sunflowers in deep gold bloom that stretched almost to the horizon. He did not name any of them. The naming was less important than the seeing. Each thing he pointed at was added to the growing internal library that was replacing the printed library he had read in the room inside the mountain. And Finn watched it happen and felt deeply privileged to be the brother sitting in front of his brother for this particular afternoon of human history. They followed Caleb's compass straight and steady all afternoon. Across central France, across the gentler hills of the south, across the warmer, wider light of the Mediterranean coast where the sea was suddenly a different color entirely, the deep electric blue of southern water that Finn had only ever seen in photographs, and which was visibly even more extraordinary in person than any photograph had managed to convey. Caleb sat behind him and held the small warm compass and watched the color of the world change beneath them and did not say very much. But his presence was different now from the quiet boy who had walked carefully out of the mountain a week before. There was a steadiness to him that had been growing all morning. The journey was doing him good in a way Finn could feel through the closeness of their backs against each other on Ember's back. The compass took them past the southern coast of France and out across the western Mediterranean. They flew low for a while, because the sky here was bright and clear, and Ember was clearly enjoying the warm currents rising off the sea. Caleb leaned over the dragon's side and trailed his fingertips through the spray that rose from the wave crests as they passed close, and the soft amber-gold light of his skin came on briefly at the contact with the water before he closed it down again. A small private experiment that Finn pretended not to notice in order to give his brother his privacy. The compass took them past one large island and over another, and across more water, and finally, as the sun was beginning its long, slow descent toward the western horizon, the needle began to do something it had not done all day. It started to tighten its bearing, sharpening, concentrating. The way a compass behaves when it is approaching the precise point it has been pointing at from a very long way away. Caleb tapped Finn's shoulder. "We are close," he said. Finn slowed Ember with a gentle pressure of his knees, and they began to descend in long, slow circles, scanning the landscape unfolding beneath them. They were over a region of southern Europe Finn did not immediately recognize. Low rolling hills, small terracotta-roofed villages scattered across a landscape of olive groves and small farms and narrow, winding country roads. The land itself was old here in a way that was completely different from the highland old of home. The highlands were old the way rock is old. This land was old the way human use is old. Every hillside cultivated for 2,000 years, every track worn by 20 centuries of feet, the whole landscape gentled by the patient continuous presence of people working with it for so long that nature and human use had blended into a single softer thing. The compass needle tightened further as they descended. It was no longer pointing south. It was pointing down, specifically down and slightly forward at a particular small valley between two low hills, where a single old olive tree stood alone in the center of a wide, open meadow, with what appeared to be. Finn had to squint into the warm afternoon light to be sure. A small figure sitting beneath the olive tree, completely still, apparently waiting. They landed at the edge of the meadow. Ember folded her wings and looked at the figure beneath the tree, and then at Finn with the particular tilt of her head that meant, "That is a person, and they are not surprised to see us, and you should walk over there carefully." They walked over carefully. The grass beneath their boots was warm and dry and smelled of crushed wild herbs as they passed through it. Bees moved between scatterings of small yellow flowers. The air here was warm and gold, and so different from the highland morning they had left behind that Caleb made a small involuntary sound of pleasure as they walked, the way a person makes a sound when they step into a hot bath after a cold day. The figure beneath the olive tree was an old woman. She was sitting cross-legged on a worn blanket spread across the meadow grass, and her hands were folded calmly in her lap, and her eyes were closed when they approached. She had a long single braid of silver-white hair down her back, and her clothes were simple, a soft cream-colored tunic and loose trousers and worn leather sandals. And she radiated the particular quality of stillness that some very old people radiate when they have spent a great deal of their lives sitting still in patient attention to whatever is around them. As they came closer, Finn noticed something else about her. Her skin glowed, very softly, the same warm amber gold as Caleb's skin in the morning, gentler now in the strong afternoon sunlight, but unmistakable up close. She was holding sunlight inside her in exactly the way Caleb was learning to. She opened her eyes as they reached the edge of the blanket. Her eyes were a clear pale gray. She looked at Caleb first, then at Finn, then at Nora, then at Ember, who had folded herself down at a respectful distance and was watching with both golden eyes wide. "You are very welcome," she said. Her voice was warm and unhurried and had the very faint trace of an accent Finn could not immediately place. "I have been waiting for you. Please sit. I have made tea, although I will admit it is rather different to what you are probably used to." There is a small clay pot beside her and 4 small clay cups. She had set out 4 cups before they arrived. They sat. The grass was warm beneath them. The old woman poured tea from the clay pot, a pale gold tea that smelled of rosemary and something honey-sweet, into the 4 cups and handed one to each of them. Caleb accepted his cup with both hands, and the soft glow of his skin brightened slightly at the warmth of the clay against his palms. The old woman saw it and smiled gently. "Welcome, child," she said quietly to Caleb. "We have not had a new one in a very long time." Caleb's eyes filled. He set his cup down carefully on the blanket and pressed his hands to his face for a moment, and Finn understood, watching him, that his brother had been carrying the weight of being the only one in the world without realizing it, and was now setting that weight down in the simple presence of another person who had carried it before him. The old woman waited until Caleb was ready. Then she said, "My name is Anya. I am 103 years old. I have been waiting in this meadow for you for the last 42 years. I came here when your grandfather asked me to. He found me in another country. I had been hiding, for reasons that I will explain in time, and he told me about his own son, who was small then, and about the children that son might one day have. He told me he had a feeling about the line. He thought one of them might be like me. He asked if I would be willing to wait, here in this meadow, with the gift held quietly, so that when the time came there would be someone to teach the new one what they were going to need to know." She looked at Caleb. "Today is the day, child. I have been waiting 42 years for this afternoon. And let me tell you immediately, it was absolutely worth every day of it." Caleb did not speak. He looked at her, and his eyes were full and his skin was glowing softly amber gold in the warm Mediterranean afternoon, and Anya looked back at him with the particular tenderness of someone who has spent 42 years quietly believing in the existence of a person she had never met, and is now sitting across a small clay teapot from him in a meadow at the end of a journey. And Finn felt that he was witnessing something so sacred and so private that the proper response was simply to stay very still and let it happen. Anya taught Caleb 3 things that afternoon. The first thing she taught him was how to hold the light steady, not just to glow but to hold, to make the inner amber light into a quiet, stable presence that could remain at any chosen brightness for any length of time, like an internal lamp with a careful dimmer. She showed him how, with a soft narration of her own process, pull the light toward your sternum, settle it there, breathe with it slowly, do not let it scatter. Caleb practiced for about 20 minutes and got the basics of it, and Anya nodded approvingly. The second thing she taught him was how to release the light to other things. She put her hand on a wilted brown stem of wild thyme growing near the edge of the blanket, a stem that had been dying in the late summer heat, and the gentle amber glow of her own skin traveled down her arm and through her fingers and into the stem, and the brown stem visibly straightened and softened and turned green again in the space of perhaps 30 seconds, and small white buds appeared along its length where there had been only brittle dead branchlets a moment before. She let Caleb try with a different dying stem nearby. His first attempt was clumsy and the stem only partially revived, but his second attempt was clean and the stem came fully back to life, and the look on his face was one of such pure delight that Finn had to look away for a moment to give his brother privacy with the discovery. The third thing Anya taught him was the hardest. She taught him that the work of an old one was almost never done in public. It was done in quiet places, in small dying gardens behind houses where children were sad, in the corners of forests where saplings were struggling, in dark hospital rooms where someone was scared and could not say why, in the slow, patient warming of cold places that needed warming. It was not glamorous. It was not photographed. It was never recognized in any obvious way. It was the kind of work that left small good things behind without ever leaving a name attached to them. The old ones had been very particular about this for thousands of years. They went where they were needed. They left light where it was needed. They did not stay long. They did not explain themselves. They moved on. Caleb listened to all of this with the careful seriousness of someone learning the shape of his own future, and when Anya finished he nodded once and said simply, "That sounds right." The afternoon went on. Tea was poured a second time. Anya told them stories about other old ones she had known in her long life. All of them now passed away, all of them having done their quiet good work in their quiet good ways. About her own decision to wait in this meadow when their grandfather had asked her, and the way he had explained the request, with the particular careful honesty that Finn was beginning to understand had been his grandfather's defining quality. About the small village 3 kilometers down the road where she lived in a small stone house with 2 cats and a vegetable garden and a small library of poetry books in 7 languages. She invited them to come to the house for dinner before they flew home. She made them promise to come back. Often as Caleb needed. Then she gave Finn a single sentence to take home with him. She had taken his hand quietly and held it across the blanket and looked at him with her clear pale gray eyes and said, "Your grandfather did not die the way the family was told he died. He gave his life. There is a difference, and the difference matters. Take this sentence home with you and tell old Thomas you have it. He will know what to do with it." She said no more about it that afternoon. The sentence sat in Finn's chest the rest of the day, warm and heavy and complicated, and he did not know yet what to do with it, but he understood that it was a key, another key, and that the door it opened was still somewhere ahead of them. They flew home that night under a sky of southern stars, Ember tracking the constellations that would take them back north, both compasses now pointing the same direction for the first time, the warm gold-white needle of Caleb's compass pointing home now alongside the steady original compass needle that had always pointed at Caleb. They landed back behind the cottage in the small hours of the Highland morning, and the cottage windows were dark and the village was asleep, and the cold air on Finn's face felt like coming home felt. Familiar and good and complete. That, the lesson at the center of this kid's adventure story for explorers, is the lesson that the meadow taught all 3 of them in different ways. The most important relationships in your life will sometimes include people you have not yet met. Sometimes they will include people who are waiting for you across very long distances and very long times. Not because they are sad and lonely, but because they understand that something good is coming and they are willing to wait quietly for the day it arrives. Be the kind of person who is worth waiting for. And be the kind of person who, when your own time comes, is willing to wait quietly for someone else. Because almost everything truly good in this world is built on the patient willingness of one person to hold something gently in trust for another person, sometimes across years, sometimes across generations. That patience is one of the deepest and quietest forms of love there is, and the world runs on it more than anyone admits. Hey explorers, if you flew all the way south to a quiet European meadow with Finn, Caleb, Nora, and Ember today, and met Anya, the 103-year-old old one who had been waiting 42 years for that afternoon, give this video the biggest thumbs up it has ever received, because you have absolutely earned every moment of it. Our comment question today is one of the most beautiful we have asked yet. If you had a small compass that pointed in one specific direction, the way Caleb's does, where do you think yours would lead you, and what do you hope you would find there? Leave your answer below. Every single response gets read. Subscribe to Whoosh Tales right now and ring that notification bell so you never miss a single adventure story for kids. Because next week, Finn delivers Anya's sentence to old Thomas. And the conversation that follows in the small stone cottage kitchen on a quiet Highland evening is going to rewrite everything Finn and Caleb thought they knew about the man who built every passage and hid every lens and waited for both of them to be ready. We will see you next week, explorers. Hush! Late that night, Finn lay in bed unable to sleep, Anya's sentence turning over and over in his head. Caleb was breathing softly on his pile of blankets beside the bed. Outside the window, Ember was settled in the barn with one golden eye open, watching the night sky over the highlands. Finn thought about his grandfather, about the careful slanting handwriting in the journal and the letter underground, about the room he had built inside the mountain, about the lens hidden in a hollow in the oldest tree, about the original compass placed in its chamber, and the path he had quietly laid across 40 years of his life so that his grandson would walk into all of it ready. He gave his life. There is a difference, and the difference matters. Finn closed his eyes. Tomorrow he would tell old Thomas, and then they would find out what the difference was. And whatever it was, he understood, he and Caleb together would be the ones to carry it forward.